The millionaire swore he would never kiss her, but she broke his promise on the first night. The sound of crystal shattering against the wall echoed through the meeting room of Stanford Enterprises, located on the 40th floor of one of Chicago's most imposing skyscrapers. Logan Stanford, the company's CEO, remained motionless in his Italian leather chair, watching the shiny fragments scatter across the gray carpet. His expression, normally controlled and calculating, revealed a mixture of fury and disappointment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stanford," said Caroline, his executive assistant for more than a decade, picking up the shards of what had once been an elegant glass of water. "Would you like me to call someone from the cleaners?" Logan made a gesture, dismissing the offer. His blue-gray eyes fixed on his laptop screen, where sensational headlines splashed his latest humiliation: CEO of Stanford Enterprises falls for millionaire scam. The worst thing was not the money lost, which for someone of his wealth meant little, but the way Amanda Reynolds, his ex-fiancée and former employee, had manipulated not only his feelings, but also confidential company information. "Megan's coming up to see you," Caroline informed him, referring to Logan's younger sister. He nodded, running a hand through his meticulously cut dark hair. At 36, Logan had built an empire in the technology sector, but his personal life was a disaster. The episode with Amanda was just the latest in a series of failed relationships with female employees of the company. Megan Stanford entered the room like a hurricane, her high heels echoing against the floor. At 32, she was the only person who could talk to Logan without filters or fear of reprisals. "You need to stop blaming yourself," she declared, sitting down in the chair opposite her brother's desk. Amanda was a professional con artist. Even the FBI was after her. "It's not just about Amanda," Logan replied, his deep voice carrying the weight of years of mistrust. "It's about me, about my choices. It's over Megan. I'm not getting involved with any more female employees. With anyone who works for me or depends on my money." "Logan." "No," he interrupted her, getting up to look at the panoramic view of Chicago. "It's a promise I'm making to myself. No more mixing business with pleasure." 2 weeks. Later, Logan was at his mansion in Lake Forest, a luxurious suburb of Chicago, when Ruby Collins walked through his door for the first time. The 28-year-old had been recommended by his trusted employee agency to replace his previous housekeeper, who had retired. "Mr. Stanford," Ruby greeted him with a formality that didn't match her expressive green eyes and her red hair tied up in a floppy bun. "Thank you for the opportunity." Logan eyed her suspiciously. Ruby wore a simple but elegant outfit, and something in her posture suggested that she was used to refined surroundings. Her documents were impeccable, her references solid, but years in the business world had taught Logan to always look beyond the surface. "Mrs. Peterson will show you your assignments," he replied dryly, turning his attention back to the documents in his hands. "The mansion has strict rules. I expect them to be followed to the letter." Over the next few weeks, Logan couldn't help but notice the quiet efficiency with which Ruby went about her work. She had a particular way of organizing the books in the library, her favorite part of the house, and he often found her there, after hours seemingly engrossed in reading. "She's different," Megan commented over Sunday dinner. "Did you notice how she organizes everything in an almost literary?" Logan ignored his sister's comment, but he knew exactly what she was talking about. Ruby had a presence that went beyond her role in the house. There was something familiar about her way of seeing the world, something he couldn't quite define. "Don't start," he warned when he noticed Megan's mischievous smile. "Remember my promise." "Oh yes, the famous 'I'll never kiss that maid,'" Megan mimicked him, rolling her eyes. "But you can't deny that there's something intriguing about her." Logan refused to admit it, but his sister was right. Ruby was an enigma that he was determined not to unravel. However, fate had other plans for that Sunday evening. A violent storm hit Lake Forest, plunging the mansion into darkness. Logan, who was working in his office, decided to check the circuit breakers in the basement. On the way, a flickering light coming from the library caught his eye. There was Ruby, illuminated only by a candle, sitting in her favorite armchair. On the table, an open laptop revealed pages and pages of text. When a flash of lightning illuminated The room Logan saw something that made his heart stop on the screen. The name of the author of his favorite book, a novel he had read dozens of times, written by a mysterious R. C. Stone, the initials, the way the books were organized, the familiarity with which she moved around the library. It all made sense at that moment. "You're R.C. Stone," he said, his voice barely containing his surprise. Ruby stood up in a huff, closing her laptop quickly. "Mr. Stanford, I can explain. You're the author of Shadows of Twilight," he continued, stepping closer. "The book that helped me get over the death of my parents." Ruby's eyes widened at the revelation. "Like you. I've read your work more times than I can count." Logan confessed, his voice softer than it had ever been with her. "But why are you working as a housekeeper?" "Research," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "My next book is set in a historic mansion. I needed to experience the atmosphere, understand the dynamics. I didn't expect to find such a dedicated reader." A deafening clap of thunder shook the mansion, and Ruby took an involuntary step towards Logan. The proximity between them was now dangerously small, and all the promises Logan had made to himself began to melt like wax under the heat of that moment. "You lied about who you were," he said, but there was no accusation in his voice. "No," Ruby replied, holding his gaze. "I just omitted part of the story, just as you omit your own stories, Mr. Stanford." The tension between them was palpable, electrified by the lightning that continued to illuminate the library. Logan knew he was about to break his promise, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't care about the consequences. The world seemed to freeze at that moment in the library. Logan watched Ruby with an intensity that made his heart race, while the lightning continued to illuminate the room in dramatic flashes. The discovery of her true identity had changed everything, and at the same time, nothing. "How long did you intend to keep that secret?" Logan asked, his voice softer than usual, almost hypnotized by the way the candlelight danced across her face. Ruby closed her laptop carefully, as if that simple gesture could give her time to organize her thoughts. "Until I finish my research, 3 months at the most. I never imagined that my employer would be such a fan of my work." A particularly loud clap of thunder rattled the windows of the library. Ruby instinctively took another step towards Logan, further reducing the distance between them. Her perfume, a subtle blend of vanilla and old pages, enveloped him completely. "Your book." Logan began, struggling to keep his composure. "You wrote about loss and redemption in a way that no one else could. How did you know? How did you understand exactly how I felt about my parents?" Ruby's gaze softened, and she allowed her mask of professional efficiency to fall for a moment. "Because I lost mine too. I was too young to understand, but old enough to carry the scars." Logan felt his throat tighten. In all the years since Shadows of Twilight had been published, he had tried to discover the identity of the mysterious R.C. Stone. Now the author was there, inches away from him, as vulnerable and real as he had ever imagined. "Why did you choose to work here?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Of all the mansions in Chicago, your house has history," Ruby replied, gesturing to the bookshelves that surrounded them. "These books, this library, there are generations of stories here. When the agency mentioned this position, I researched the place. About you." A wry smile appeared on Logan's lips. "So you knew about Amanda?" "About the scammer, yes." Ruby held his gaze. "And about all the other stories the tabloids love to publish about Chicago's most eligible bachelor. But I also read about how you transformed your parents' company, about the social projects you keep secret, about the scholarships you offer anonymously." Logan felt his face heat up. This was information he kept out of the spotlight parts of his life he preferred to keep private. "You've done your homework." "I'm a writer," she shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "Research is what I do." The storm outside seemed to intensify, as if mirroring the turmoil of emotions inside the library. Logan realized that he was dangerously close to breaking all the rules he had set for himself. "Your next book," he changed the subject, trying to regain some control. "What's it really about?" Ruby hesitated, biting her lower lip slightly, a gesture Logan had noticed before, and which now seemed even more fascinating. "It's about second chances. About people who build walls around themselves, and what happens when those walls start to crumble. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed by either of them. There they were, a CEO who had sworn never to get involved with female employees again, and a writer disguised as a housekeeper trapped in a library during a storm discussing emotional walls. "Mrs. Peterson was right about you," Logan commented, remembering the old housekeeper who had recommended Ruby. "She said you had something special." "She knows who I am," Ruby admitted. "She was one of the first people to read my book, even before it was published. She's one of the few who knows my true identity." Logan processed the information, realizing that his trusted retired housekeeper had deliberately brought R.C. Stone into his home. Did she plan it? Not exactly, Ruby smiled. She just created an opportunity. The rest was coincidence. "I don't believe in coincidences," Logan muttered, his gaze fixed on her lips. The air between them was charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Ruby watched him with a mixture of apprehension and something else, something that made Logan's heart beat faster. "Maybe we should check the other rooms," she suggested, her voice just a whisper. "Make sure everything's okay with the storm." "We should," Logan agreed, but neither of them moved. At that moment, another flash of lightning lit up the library, and Logan saw something in Ruby's gaze that made him forget all his promises. It was the same look he had found in the pages of Shadows of Twilight, a mixture of strength and vulnerability, of wisdom and uncertainty. And there, surrounded by thousands of books that had witnessed generations of stories, Logan Stanford realized that he was about to begin a new chapter in his own life. A chapter that began with a storm, a writer in disguise, and a promise about to be broken. Dawn found Logan in his office, the first rays of sunlight penetrating through the windows, still streaked with rain from the night before. He hadn't slept, his mind endlessly replaying the events in the library. The kiss he had exchanged with Ruby remained vivid in his memory, soft at first, then intense as the storm roaring outside. "You broke your own rule in record time." Megan's voice surprised him from the doorway. His sister, impeccable in a navy blue executive ensemble, was holding 2 cups of coffee. "How did you?" Logan began, but was interrupted. "Mrs. Peterson called me this morning. Apparently the library's security cameras caught a rather interesting moment during the blackout." Logan closed his eyes, massaging his temples. "The cameras have power backup, and you should know that." Megan smiled, handing him one of the cups. "So R.C. Stone, huh? I must admit, I didn't see that one coming." "It's none of your business, Megan." "Oh, but it is, especially since I have an appointment with her publisher in half an hour." Seeing her brother's surprised expression, she continued, "Have you forgotten that Stanford Publishing is a subsidiary of your company, Ruby Collins, or rather Rachel Caroline Stone, has had a contract with us for 5 years. Logan felt as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. Stanford Publishing was one of the many arms of his business empire, but he rarely got directly involved with its operations. "Why didn't you ever mention it?" "Because R.C. Stone is notoriously secretive. Even I didn't know her true identity until this morning, when I connected the dots." Megan sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" Logan stood up, walking over to the window. The mansion was silent. Ruby had asked for the day off for the first time since she'd started working there. "There's nothing I can do," he finally replied. "She works for me technically in 2 different roles. It would be unethical." "Unethical," Megan laughed. "Logan, she's a best-selling author masquerading as a housekeeper to do research. I don't think conventional rules apply here." Before Logan could reply, his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Ruby. "We need to talk. Café Luminous, noon." Café Luminous was a discreet establishment in downtown Chicago, known for its clientele of writers and artists. Logan knew the place. There was a copy of Shadows of Twilight permanently displayed on one of its shelves. "Go," Megan encouraged him, reading the message over his shoulder. "And this time, try not to make any dramatic oaths." At 12 o'clock on the dot, Logan parked his Aston Martin in front of the cafe. Ruby was already there, sitting at a table at the back, wearing jeans and a green sweater that highlighted her eyes. There was nothing of the formal housekeeper about her. This was R.C. Stone in her natural environment. "You came?" she said when he sat down. "Did you know about Stanford Publishing?" Logan asked bluntly. Ruby nodded. It was one of the reasons I took the job. I needed to understand the man behind the empire that publishes my books. And what did you discover? A man who has built walls as high as mine, she replied, her fingers playing with the teacup in front of her, but for different reasons. Logan studied her face, looking for signs of the woman he had kissed the night before. She was there, hidden under layers of professional composure. Why the need for anonymity? He asked. Your books are international successes. For the same reason you keep your charitable projects a secret, Ruby smiled. Some things are more valuable when they remain private. A waiter approached and they ordered coffee. The silence that followed was laden with unspoken words. About last night, Logan began. It was a moment, Ruby interrupted him gently. A beautiful moment, but still you work for me. In theory, she agreed, but my research contract ends in 2 weeks. And as for the other one, she paused, taking an envelope out of her handbag. This is my letter of resignation as housekeeper. Logan took the envelope but didn't open it. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do, Ruby insisted. Not because I regret what happened, but because I need to finish my book honestly. And I can't do that if I'm emotionally committed to my research subject. The choice of words made him smile. So I'm your object of research. The mansion was... She blushed slightly. You were an unexpected complication. The coffee arrived and they sipped it in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Logan realized that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about Amanda or his broken promises. He was thinking about possibilities. 2 weeks, he finally said. And then what? Ruby looked at him over her cup, her green eyes shining with something that looked like hope. Then maybe we can find out if there's a story beyond that night in the library. No disguises, Logan asked. No disguises, she agreed. Just Ruby and Logan finding out if they have their own chapter to write. The clock in the cafe struck 1 o'clock, reminding them of the world beyond that moment. Ruby stood up, settling her bag on her shoulder. 2 weeks, she repeated like a promise. Logan watched her leave the cafe, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Maybe Megan was right. Some rules were just there to be broken. News of Ruby's true identity spread quickly through Chicago's literary circles. Stanford Publishing was abuzz with the discovery that the mysterious R.C. Stone had been right under their noses. Logan watched the frenzy from a distance, aware that his and Ruby's every move was being scrutinized. Your phone hasn't stopped ringing, commented Caroline, his assistant, entering his office with a pile of messages. 3 literary magazines, 2 talk shows, and even the New York Times want a statement about your relationship with R.C. Stone. Logan pushed the papers aside with irritation. There's no relationship to comment on. The library videos say otherwise, Caroline replied with a knowing smile. In her 15 years working for Logan, she had never seen him so unsettled. Those videos should have been deleted, he muttered, wiping his hand across his face. Mrs. Peterson has a backup copy, Caroline shrugged. Apparently she's writing her own memoirs, Confessions of a Housekeeper, Love and Literature at Stanford Manor. Logan groaned, sinking into his chair. The 2 weeks since the kiss in the library had turned into a whirlwind of speculation and gossip. Ruby maintained her routine at the mansion, but the dynamic between them had changed completely. Every glance, every unspoken word carried the weight of that stormy night. Mr. Stanford, his secretary's voice sounded through the intercom. Ms. Collins is here for the 2 o'clock meeting. Logan straightened his tie, trying to ignore the way his heart raced. This would be their first official meeting at Stanford Publishing, a necessary formality to discuss Ruby's next book. She entered the room with the grace he had learned to admire, wearing a navy blue dress that made her look more like an executive than the housekeeper he had known. Megan accompanied her along with Daniel Harrison, the publisher's editor-in-chief. Good afternoon, Mr. Stanford. Ruby greeted him formally, her green eyes sparkling with a hint of amusement. Miss Collins, he replied in the same tone, indicating the chairs. Please have a seat. Daniel opened his briefcase, spreading documents out on the table. The outline of the new book is fascinating, Ms. Collins. Your research at the Stanford mansion has certainly borne interesting fruit. More than you might think, Megan muttered, receiving sharp looks from both Logan and Ruby. The book, Ruby snorted, explores themes of identity and social masks, how people hide behind carefully constructed facades. And romance, Daniel added, flicking through his notes. There's an undeniable chemistry between the protagonists. The scene in the library during the storm is particularly vivid. Logan choked on his coffee, while Ruby maintained her professional composure, although her cheeks had taken on a rosy hue. Art imitating life, Megan couldn't resist commenting. The manuscript is still in development, Ruby quickly interjected. Many things can change until the final version. The meeting continued with discussions about deadlines, marketing, and launch strategies. Logan found himself watching Ruby as she spoke passionately about her work, gesturing with her hands, in a way that he found adorable. It was hard to believe that this confident, articulate woman was the same one who had been quietly organizing his library for a few weeks. I think we've covered everything, Daniel concluded after an hour. Ms. Collins, will we maintain the confidentiality agreement about your identity until the launch? Please, she nodded. I'd like to finish my time at the mansion without outside interference. As everyone got up to leave, Logan called out to her, Ms. Collins, could you stay for a moment? Megan gave him a suggestive smile before closing the door, leaving them alone. The silence that followed was fraught with unresolved tension. Your book, Logan began. Is it about us? Ruby moved closer to the window, watching the Chicago skyline. It's about people who build fortresses around their hearts and what happens when someone finds a breach in the walls. What about the library scene? Some experiences are too precious not to be immortalized, she replied, turning to face him, even in fictional form. Logan reduced the distance between them, stopping just a few steps away from Ruby. We still have a week until your contract as a housekeeper ends. Yes, she whispered, her eyes meeting his. A week to decide if our story ends in the library or if there are more chapters to be written. What if I don't want to wait a week? Logan asked, his voice husky with restrained desire. Ruby smiled that smile that had begun to populate her dreams. Some stories can't be rushed, Mr. Stanford. Each chapter has its moment. With that, she walked away towards the door, leaving behind only the scent of vanilla and unspoken promises. Logan remained motionless, watching her silhouette disappear in the corridor, aware that he was completely involved in a story that he no longer had any control over ending. In the elevator, Ruby leaned her forehead against the cold mirror, trying to calm her racing heart. On her laptop, the manuscript of her new book pulsed with only partially fictional truths, waiting to see if life would imitate art, or if this time reality would surpass fiction. The week following the meeting at Stanford Publishing was an exercise in self-control for Logan and Ruby. During the day, they maintained a professional facade, she as the efficient housekeeper, he as the distant CEO. But at night in the library, the masks began to fall away. Do you really need to reorganize the entire classical literature section? Logan asked one such evening, finding Ruby perched on a ladder surrounded by stacks of books. I'm cataloging literary influences, she replied without looking away from the bookshelves. It's fascinating how your collection reflects your personal preferences. Lots of Gothic fiction, Victorian novels. Are you analyzing me through my books, Miss Collins? Ruby descended a few steps of the ladder now at his eye level. That's what writers do. We observe, we analyze, we try to understand what makes people who they are. And what did you find out about me? That behind the ruthless CEO there's an incurable romantic, she smiled, picking up an old edition of Jane Eyre. This book has markings in all the scenes between Rochester and Jane. Logan felt his face heat up. It was true that particular copy had belonged to his mother, and he had read it countless times during his teenage years. Maybe you should write a Gothic novel in your next novel, he suggested, changing the subject. An old mansion, dark secrets. Oh, but I'm already doing that, Ruby laughed, climbing completely down the ladder. Although my version is more contemporary, less ghosts in the attic, more tormented CEOs in their offices. The comment provoked a genuine smile from Logan, something that was becoming more frequent these days. It was surreal how Ruby could penetrate his defenses so naturally. Mrs. Peterson called today. He mentioned watching Ruby arrange the books on a nearby table. Apparently she's getting offers for her memoirs. She was always an excellent observer, Ruby commented amused. She knew exactly what she was doing when she recommended me for the job. You never told me how you met her. Ruby paused in her organizing, her fingers absent-mindedly stroking the spine of a book. It was 5 years ago when I started writing Shadows of Twilight. I was researching loss and bereavement, and she had just lost her husband. Our conversations, well, they shaped a lot of what I wrote. Logan moved closer, lightly touching the book she held. Their fingers brushed for a moment, sending goosebumps down both arms. "Now you have a gift for making people open up," he observed softly. "It's easier to open up to someone who also carries scars," she replied, her eyes meeting his. The moment was interrupted by the sound of heels in the corridor. Megan appeared. In the doorway of the library, her eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and urgency. "Sorry to interrupt your literary moment," she said, "but we have a problem. Amanda's back." The name dropped like a bomb in the quiet atmosphere of the library. Logan felt his body stiffen. Instantly, while Ruby took an instinctive step back. "What do you mean back?" Logan asked, his voice sharp. "She's doing interviews," Megan explained, showing him her tablet. Apparently she found out about Ruby, or rather about R. C. Stone, and is painting a whole narrative about how you have a specific type women who hide their true identities. Ruby paled slightly but kept her composure. "She can't." "She can, and she is," Megan interrupted her gently. "The story is spreading fast. Billionaire CEO involved with writer disguised as maid is exactly the kind of headline the press loves." Logan ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Ruby had already learned to associate with his frustration. "This can't affect the release of the book." "It won't," Ruby said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Amanda has no power over my story, nor over ours." The last word hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Logan stared at her, finding in her green eyes the same determination that had made him fall in love with her words years before. 3 days, he said suddenly. "What?" Megan and Ruby asked in unison. "Your contract as a housekeeper," Logan clarified. "We don't need to wait another week. 3 days is enough time for the transition." Ruby immediately understood what he was proposing. With the official end of her role as an employee, they could face the media storm on equal terms. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Amanda wants to create a narrative about masks and lies," Logan replied, moving closer to her. "Let's give her and the world a story about truths and redemption instead." Megan watched the scene with a satisfied smile. "Well, it looks like R.C. Stone will have enough material for another bestseller." Ruby and Logan barely heard her, lost in their own moment of mutual understanding. In 3 days, all the masks would fall, and they would find out if their story was strong enough to survive exposure to the real world. The news about Amanda exploded like a bomb in the Chicago tabloids. The morning after the revelation in the library, Logan found his mansion surrounded by photographers and reporters, all eager to capture a glimpse of the supposed new romance between the CEO and the mysterious writer. "They're comparing you to a modern version of Jane Austen," commented Caroline, handing Logan a stack of newspapers in her office at Stanford Enterprises. Apparently, a best-selling author working undercover as a housekeeper is irresistible material for the press. Logan ignored the tabloids, concentrating on his laptop, where dozens of emails demanded his attention. Most were from shareholders worried about the impact of the new controversy on business. "Amanda's interview will air tonight," Megan announced, entering the room without knocking. "CNN primetime. She's promising explosive revelations about the dear Stanford CEO's pattern of relationships." "What pattern?" Logan growled. "There was only her." "Exactly why we need to get ahead of this," Megan insisted, taking a seat opposite her brother. "Ruby has agreed to give an exclusive interview to the Chicago Tribune. The real story, no sensationalism." Logan looked up surprised. "She never gives interviews." "Well, circumstances have changed," a familiar voice sounded from the doorway. Ruby entered the office wearing an elegant emerald green ensemble that made her look more like an executive than the housekeeper he had known. "I'm not going to let Amanda control our narrative." Logan's heart raced at the sight of her. They had barely spoken in the last 24 hours, too busy managing the crisis that was brewing. "You don't have to do that," he said softly. "Your privacy." "It's important," Ruby added, approaching his desk, "but not as much as the truth. Amanda is trying to turn our story into something sordid, as if I'm just another scammer in her life." Megan sniffed discreetly. "The Tribune photographer will be here in an hour. I suggest we use the mansion's library for the photos. It'll be a nice reference to the night of the storm." Logan and Ruby exchanged glances, remembering vividly that night that had changed everything. "The interview will be conducted by Catherine Martinez," Megan continued. "She's known for her sensitive and in-depth approach." "I know her work," Ruby nodded. "She gave Shadows of Twilight a glowing review when it was released." An hour later, they were back at the mansion. The library, that space that held so many recent memories, had been subtly reorganized for the photo shoot. Mrs. Peterson, who had refused to take a few days off, despite the confusion, had placed fresh flowers strategically around the room. "You look natural together," commented Catherine Martinez after the first photos. "How did this story really begin?" Ruby looked at Logan, seeking his silent approval before beginning. "It started with a book, actually. A book about loss and redemption that, unbeknownst to me, had deeply touched Mr. Stanford years before." "Logan," he corrected her softly. "I think we're past the formalities stage." Catherine smiled, making notes. "And why the need for disguise, Ms. Collins?" "Ruby has always kept her identity a secret," Logan interjected, surprising everyone with his passionate defense. "It wasn't a disguise, it was an artistic and personal choice that I deeply respect." "But now that choice is being questioned by your ex-fiancé?" Catherine observed. "How do you respond to accusations that there is a pattern of involvement with female employees?" Ruby straightened her shoulders, her voice firm as she replied, "There's a crucial difference here. Amanda Reynolds approached Logan with a false identity and fraudulent intentions. I came to work here as part of legitimate research for my next book with verifiable references and an established career. A career that ironically was already connected to Stanford Enterprises through the publisher," Logan added. The interview continued for another hour, with Catherine delicately exploring the evolution of their relationship. When the last photos were taken, including a particularly touching one of Logan and Ruby among the bookshelves, there was a sense that the real story would finally be told. "I think we've done it," Megan declared after the newspaper crew had left. "The story comes out tomorrow, a few hours before Amanda's interview." Ruby dropped into her favorite armchair in the library, looking exhausted but relieved. "I still can't believe I've revealed my identity to the world. 15 years of anonymity, and now—" "You didn't have to do that," Logan said, taking a seat next to her. "Yes, I did." She smiled softly. "Because some stories deserve to be told with total honesty, and ours is one of them." At that moment, watching Ruby in her library, Logan realized that all the promises he had made to himself about never getting involved with female employees again seemed distant and meaningless. The universe, in its infinite irony, had sent not just another employee his way, but the author who had touched his soul through words long before their paths had crossed in person. And now, as they waited for the media storm that would surely come with Amanda's interview, Logan knew that some stories were worth the risk of having their hearts exposed again, especially when that story was being written by four hands with the finesse of a novelist and the determination of a CEO who had finally learned to let down his defenses. The front page of the Chicago Tribune featured a photo that perfectly captured what was most true between Logan and Ruby. In the picture, they were in the library, he leaning on an antique bookshelf, while she held a book, both sharing a look that said more than any headline could express. "It's a beautiful photo," commented Megan, spreading out several newspapers on Logan's desk at Stanford Enterprises. "Catherine did an exceptional job with the story. From anonymity to love the true story behind the mystery writer and the CEO." Logan barely listened to his sister, his eyes fixed on the computer screen where emails kept arriving in a constant stream. The revelation of R.C. Stone's identity had caused a frenzy in the literary world, with international publishers and literary agents trying to get in touch. "Is Ruby all right?" he asked, finally looking away from the screen. "She's adjusting," Megan replied, sitting down. "Mrs. Peterson convinced her to stay at the mansion until the dust settles. The reporters are still camped out at the gates. Logan's intercom rang, interrupting the conversation. Mr. Stanford, Ms. Reynolds' interview is starting. With a heavy sigh, Logan turned on the television in his office. Amanda appeared on the screen, flawless in a red dress, her calculated smile directed at the CNN interviewer. "It's no coincidence," Amanda was saying, her melodious voice laden with false concern. "Logan has a pattern of getting involved with women who hide their true identities. First me, who admits my mistakes, and now a famous writer pretending to be an employee. There's something psychologically intriguing about that." "What a manipulative bitch," Megan muttered as Logan clenched his fists tightly. The interviewer, a seasoned professional, didn't take the bait easily. "But there's a crucial difference, isn't there, Ms. Collins, or R.C. Stone, has an established career and legitimate reasons for her research. What's more, she revealed her identity voluntarily." Amanda hesitated for a moment, but soon regained her composure. "Only after the story was about to come out. What about Stanford's shareholders? How do they feel knowing that their CEO keeps mixing business with pleasure?" Logan's phone started ringing, but he ignored it, mesmerized by Amanda's audacity in trying to tarnish not only his reputation, but Ruby's as well. "We need a counter-offensive," Megan declared, already typing furiously into her cell phone. "I'll call our legal department. Amanda is bordering on defamation." "No." Logan interrupted her, an idea forming in his mind. "I've got something better in mind." 20 minutes later, Logan parked his car in the driveway of the mansion. Ruby was waiting for him in the library, surrounded by piles of books and manuscripts. She had turned the space into her refuge during the media chaos. "I saw the interview," she said, as soon as he entered, her green eyes worried. "Logan, I'm sorry about all this." "Don't apologize," he replied, stepping closer. "Actually, I've come to make a proposal." Ruby raised an eyebrow, curious. "What kind of proposal?" "We're going to do our own interview, live tonight." "Live?" Ruby paled slightly. "Logan, you know I avoid public exposure. That's why I've remained anonymous for so long." "Exactly," he said, taking a seat next to her. "And that's why it will be even more impactful. R.C. Stone, the reclusive writer, making her first live television appearance, not to promote a book, but to defend the truth about our history." Ruby bit her lip thoughtfully. "Amanda is trying to paint us as villains in some cheap soap opera." "Then let's show them the real story," Logan insisted, taking her hands between his. "No masks, no games, just us." There was a moment of silence as Ruby considered the proposal. Logan could see the conflicting emotions on her face, the fear of exposure fighting against the desire to defend what they had built. "Where would the interview be?" she finally asked. "Here," Logan replied. "In the library. The place where it all began. ABC News primetime. Megan's already organizing everything." A small smile appeared on Ruby's lips. "You'd already decided that before you even asked me, hadn't you?" "Let's just say I was hoping you'd agree," he smiled back. "So what do you say, ready to show the world who R.C. Stone really is?" Ruby looked around the library, her gaze stopping on the armchair where she had been sitting on the night of the storm when Logan had discovered her identity. So many things had changed since then. "On one condition," she finally said. "I want to read an excerpt from my new book during the interview, the chapter on the storm." Logan felt his heart race. He hadn't read any of the new manuscript yet, although he knew that her story had inspired much of it. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "Absolutely," Ruby replied, her eyes meeting his with determination. "If we're going to tell our story, let's tell it the way we know best, through words." At that moment, watching Ruby in her library, Logan completely understood why he had fallen in love with her. It wasn't just the talented writer or the mysterious woman he had met as a housekeeper. It was her courage in facing her fears, her determination to stand up for the truth, even if it meant sacrificing the anonymity she held so dear. "Mrs. Paterson will love this," he commented, trying to ease the tension of the moment. "She's probably already planning the chapter about the interview in her memoirs." Ruby laughed, the sound filling the library with a lightness that had been absent in recent days. "Well then, let's give her a memorable chapter." The night was approaching, and with it the moment when they would face the world together, no longer hidden behind titles or positions, but as simply Logan and Ruby, two hearts that had found each other among old books and secrets revealed. The ABC News spotlight turned the Stanford Mansion's library into a makeshift movie set. Ruby watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension as technicians adjusted lights and cameras among the century-old mahogany bookshelves. 5 minutes, announced the production manager, his voice echoing through the normally quiet room. Logan adjusted his tie for the 10th time, a nervous gesture that Ruby had already learned to recognize. He could command a boardroom with the confidence of a general, but tonight was different. Tonight wasn't about business. It was about exposing long-held truths. "Saw your manuscript," he said softly, noticing the file Ruby held against her chest like a shield. "Are you sure you want to read that passage?" "It's the most honest way to tell our story," she replied, smoothing her emerald green dress, the same color she wore on the night of the storm. "Besides, after Amanda's interview, we need to show that there's nothing sordid or calculated about our meeting." The mention of the previous interview made Logan frown. Amanda's accusations had caused Stanford Enterprises' shares to plummet, and some board members were already expressing concern about the impact on the company's image. "Diana Martinez is ready to start," Megan informed them, approaching them. The ABC anchor was known for her direct but compassionate approach. "She'll start with questions about Shades of Twilight, then transition into how you two met." Ruby nodded her fingers unconsciously, squeezing the pages of the manuscript. The decision to read an excerpt from her new book live was a risky one. She had never shared a work in progress before. 30 seconds, the director's voice cut through the air. Logan took Ruby's hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "Together, together," she confirmed, feeling the power of that simple touch calm her nerves. The cameras started rolling, and Diana Martinez opened the interview with her characteristic professional elegance. "Good evening, America. We're live from the historic Stanford Mansion in Lake Forest, Chicago, where a story worthy of the best novels has unfolded over the last few months." The interview flowed naturally at first, with Ruby talking about her decision to remain anonymous as R.C. Stone and how this had allowed her to observe the world without the filters of literary fame. "And it was this need for observation that brought you to work as a governess?" asked Diana. "Partly," Ruby replied, her voice gaining confidence. "My new book explores themes of identity and social masks. I needed to understand how a historic house like this breathes, how the people who live here interact. And you ended up finding more than research material." Diana smiled, turning to Logan. "Mr. Stanford, your story with Amanda Reynolds has been highly publicized. How can we be sure that this situation is any different?" Logan straightened his shoulders, his gaze meeting Ruby's before he answered. "Because this time there are no lies or manipulations. Ruby or R.C. Stone never hid who she was out of malice. Her anonymity was an artistic choice, not a tool of deception." "Actually," Ruby interrupted gently, "I'd like to read something. If I may, an excerpt from my new book that might help explain it better." Diana nodded, and the studio fell into an expectant silence as Ruby opened her manuscript. Her voice, clear and melodious, began to fill the space. "There are times when the masks we wear become so heavy that we need to drop them, not because of external pressure or fear of exposure, but because we meet someone who makes us want to be real, someone who sees through our carefully constructed layers and still chooses to stay." Logan watched Ruby read, mesmerized, not only by the words, but by the way she brought them to life. The passage described in poetic prose that night in the library during the storm, not just the physical moment of the encounter, but the emotions and revelations that accompanied it. Diana Martinez, a seasoned professional, seemed genuinely touched. "So that's an extraordinary, and I have to say, after knowing the full story, that Ms. Reynolds' accusations seem not only unfounded but almost ironic. Amanda tried to create a narrative that would serve her purposes," Logan commented, his voice firm. "But the truth is that some stories don't need manipulation or dramatization. They are extraordinary in their own right." The interview continued for a few more minutes with questions about the future, both of the book and of their relationship. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, there was a palpable feeling that something had changed, not just for Logan and Ruby, but for everyone who had witnessed that moment of shared truth. "That was intense," Megan commented, approaching just as the production team began to dismantle the equipment. "Social media is already exploding. The RCS Stone revealed is trending." Ruby let out a shaky sigh, the adrenaline of the live broadcast beginning to subside. "I don't think there's any going back now." "No," Logan agreed, pulling her close. "But who says we want to go back?" The library began to empty, leaving them alone among the books that had witnessed the beginning of their story. A story that now belonged not just to them, but to the whole world. "Mrs. Peterson will need a whole chapter just for tonight in her memoirs," Ruby laughed softly. "Let her write it." Logan smiled, leaning in to kiss her. "Some stories deserve to be told more than once." The live interview had only been over for a few hours, but its effects were already spreading like ripples on a tranquil lake. Ruby woke up the next morning in one of the Stanford Mansion's guest rooms to find her phone flooded with notifications. Her literary agent had sent dozens of messages about international contract offers, invitations to lectures and literary festivals. "Your book, Shadows of Twilight, is topping the bestseller lists again," Megan announced, entering the room with a breakfast tray. "And pre-sales of the new novel are already breaking records, even without a release date set." Ruby sat down on the bed, taking the cup of coffee Megan offered. "It's surreal. I've spent so long protecting my privacy, and now you're the sensation of the moment," Megan added, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "The media are loving the story. The reclusive writer and the CEO are book-length romance. Even Amanda is being criticized on social media for her unfounded accusations." Ruby's cell phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from her editor at Stanford Publishing, scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss the launch strategy for the new book. "Is Logan at the company yet?" Ruby asked, noticing his absence during breakfast. "Board meeting," Megan replied, her tone more serious. "Some shareholders are still worried about the impact on the company's image, but after yesterday's interview, the majority are on our side." Ruby felt a pang of guilt. Despite the success of the interview, she knew that her revelation had complicated Logan's professional life. Stanford Enterprises was a traditional company, and relationships between executives and employees, even ex-employees, always generated buzz. "Don't blame yourself," Megan said, as if reading his thoughts. "Logan has never been so sure of anything in his life. Besides," she paused dramatically, "the company's shares went up 3% this morning. Apparently having a best-selling author romantically involved with the CEO isn't so bad for business." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted the conversation. Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, her normally serene face sporting a satisfied smile. "Ms. Collins, or should I say Ms. Stone, has a visitor," she announced. "Catherine Martinez from the Chicago Tribune is here for a follow-up interview, and—" She hesitated for a moment. "There's also a young woman claiming to be your sister." Ruby froze the coffee cup, stopping halfway to her lips. "Is Claire here?" "She saw the interview last night," Mrs. Peterson explained softly. "She said she took the first flight out of Portland as soon as she recognized you." Ruby's heart raced. Claire, her younger sister, was one of the few people who had known her true identity all along. They had drifted apart in recent years, especially after Ruby decided to immerse herself completely in her anonymity. "Do you want me to ask her to come back later?" Megan offered, noticing Ruby's troubled expression. "No." Ruby took a deep breath, placing her cup on the bedside table. "It's time to stop hiding from every aspect of my life." Half an hour later, Ruby walked down the stairs of the mansion, meeting Claire in the main hall. Her sister, a 25-year-old artist, looked out of place among the luxurious surroundings, her ripped jeans and blue hair contrasting with the classic decor. "So this is where you've been hiding," Claire commented, a half-smile on her lips. "When I said I was doing research for a new book, I didn't imagine it would include falling in love with a billionaire." Ruby felt tears forming in her eyes. Despite the joking tone, there were years of unresolved hurt in her sister's voice. "Claire, No," Claire interrupted her, stepping forward. I saw the interview yesterday. I saw how you talked about masks and truths, and I realized that I've been part of the problem too, keeping my distance, because it hurt me that you chose complete anonymity." The sisters looked at each other for a long moment, years of silence and secrets weighing them down. Then, as if an invisible barrier had been broken, they both moved at the same time, meeting in a tight embrace. "I missed you," Ruby whispered, smelling the familiar scent of ink and incense that she always associated with her sister. "Me too," Claire replied, her voice breaking. "And now that you're not hiding anymore, maybe we can make up for lost time." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Logan, who entered the hall still wearing his meeting suit. He paused, for a moment observing the scene with a bland expression. "You must be Claire," he said, approaching. "Ruby's told me a lot about you." Claire pulled away from the embrace, studying Logan with critical eyes. "And you're the CEO who made my sister finally come out of her shell." "Actually," Logan smiled, "it was your sister who helped me out of mine." Ruby watched them interact, feeling a wave of gratitude for how her life had changed over the last few weeks. Masks had fallen, secrets had been revealed, and yet, or perhaps because of this, she had never felt stronger or truer. Catherine Martinez waited patiently in the library, giving the family the moment they needed. There were more stories to tell, more chapters to write. But now, for the first time in a long time, Ruby was ready to tell them all, not just in her pages, but in her life. Claire's presence at the Stanford mansion brought a new dynamic to the already turbulent environment. While Catherine Martinez prepared her notes in the library, the Collins sisters shared stories of the lost years with Logan and Megan, occasionally joining in. "So you were the one who illustrated the first edition of Shadows of Twilight," Logan commented, watching Claire with renewed interest. Ruby never mentioned that the artwork was family. "Because she was too busy protecting her precious privacy," Claire teased, but with no malice in her voice, although I must admit that her research method this time produced some interesting results. Ruby blushed slightly, settling into the library armchair that had become her favorite place. "The story just happened." "The best stories are usually like this," Catherine interjected softly, switching on her tape recorder. "Do you mind if we get started? I'd like to explore some aspects that weren't covered in the television interview." The Chicago Tribune reporter had a more intimate approach than the ABC News anchor. Her questions focused not only on the romance between Ruby and Logan, but on the personal journey that led Ruby to choose anonymity. "It was after our parents died," Claire replied, when Catherine asked about the start of Ruby's literary career. "Ruby had always written, but after the accident her writing became different, deeper. It was the only way I found to process everything," Ruby explained, feeling Logan's hand find hers in silent support. "The anonymity allowed me to explore that pain without having to constantly explain it to the world." Logan watched the interaction between the sisters with growing interest. There was so much of Ruby that he was still discovering layers of her story that went far beyond the mysterious housekeeper or the reclusive author. "What now?" Catherine asked, her piercing gaze alternating between Ruby and Logan. "With your identity revealed and a new book on the way, how do you see your future?" Ruby paused, considering the question. "I think I've finally understood that some stories need to be lived in the light of day. Anonymity protected me for a long time, but it also prevented me from experiencing certain aspects of life. Like love," Catherine suggested gently. "Like genuine connections," Ruby corrected, exchanging a meaningful glance with Claire. "With my family, with special people." The interview continued for another hour, covering topics from the impact on Stanford Enterprises shares to future plans for the launch of the new book. When Catherine finally put her recorder away, there was a sense that more than a simple interview had taken place there. "You know," Claire commented after the reporter had left, "your readers are going to be fascinated when they discover that R.C. Stone is as interesting as her characters." "I'm not so sure," Ruby replied, but a small smile played on her lips. "I'm still getting used to all this exposure." "Well, you have time to adjust," Logan interjected, consulting his phone. "The board has just officially approved our situation, and sales of your books have skyrocketed in the last 24 hours. Megan, who had been silently observing the family dynamic, finally spoke up. "I think we need to celebrate. How about dinner? I can make reservations at Alinea. Or Claire suggested, her eyes shining with the familiar artistic light that Ruby knew so well. We could order in and have a quiet evening here. I have 5 years of my sister's stories to share with you. Logan laughed at Ruby's horrified expression. I think I prefer that option. Besides, Mrs. Peterson mentioned something about having kept old photo albums. Oh no, Ruby groaned, but there was no real concern in her voice. For the first time in years, she felt completely present with no masks or personas to maintain. The evening unfolded with orders of Thai food, expensive wines from Logan's cellar, and stories that filled the voids of lost years. Claire showed photos on her cell phone from her art exhibitions in Portland, while Megan shared embarrassing stories from Logan's teenage years. In a quiet moment, while the others argued animatedly about which dessert to order, Logan leaned over to Ruby. Are you okay with all this? Surprisingly, yes, she replied, watching her sister gesture as she told a story. It's like all the pieces are finally falling into place. Even with the reporters outside and the media speculation, Ruby considered the question, remembering the weight of anonymity she had carried for so long. You know, I spent years writing about characters finding the courage to be true to themselves. Maybe it was time I took my own advice. Sunday morning dawned with a gentle drizzle in Lake Forest, creating the perfect atmosphere for reading and reflection. Ruby was sitting in her usual spot in the Stanford Mansion library going over the final proofs of her new book when Logan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. Mrs. Peterson said you didn't come down for breakfast, he commented, placing one of the cups next to her. Has Claire left for the airport yet? Yes, she had an important exhibition in Portland, Ruby replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. But she promised to come back for the book launch. It's strange how quickly everything has changed, isn't it? Logan settled into the armchair opposite, watching as the diffused light of the rainy morning illuminated Ruby's profile. In recent weeks since the live interview and the reconciliation with Claire, she had seemed lighter, more present. Stanford Publishing wants to move up the launch, he mentioned, studying her reaction. Megan says the timing is perfect with all the media attention. Ruby frowned slightly, a gesture that Logan had already learned to associate with her concentration. I still need to make a few adjustments to the final chapter. After Claire was here, I realized that some things needed to be rewritten. About family, about truths, she corrected softly. About how sometimes we need to lose something to understand its true value. Logan's phone vibrated, interrupting the moment. It was a message from Megan, with a link to yet another article about them, this time a literary analysis, comparing their story to classics of romantic literature. Apparently, we're the modern version of Pride and Prejudice, he commented, showing Ruby the article. Although I don't consider myself as proud as Mr. Darcy. Oh, you were definitely as proud, Ruby laughed, putting the proofs of the book aside. The powerful CEO who swore he'd never get involved with female employees again. And you were just as prejudiced as Elizabeth Bennet, he retorted, a smile playing on his lips. The writer who disguised herself as a governess to study the rich and powerful. The sound of Ruby's laughter echoed through the library, mingling with the soft patter of rain on the windows. It was a sound Logan was still getting used to hearing, genuine, without reservations or masks. Speaking of studying the rich and powerful, she said, taking a folder from her bag, I wanted to show you something. It's the last chapter of the book. Logan felt his heart race. Although he knew that his story had inspired much of Ruby's new novel, she hadn't yet shared the full manuscript with him. Are you sure? He asked, noticing how she held the pages with almost reverent care. It's only fair that you read it first, Ruby replied, holding out the pages to him. After all, you're as much a part of this story as I am. Logan began to read, losing himself in the words that Ruby had so carefully woven together. The final chapter wasn't just about a CEO and a writer finding love. It was about 2 people learning to let down their defenses, to trust again, to allow themselves to be true. It's perfect, he finally said, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion. It's not finished yet, Ruby admitted, biting her lip slightly. The epilogue is missing, and for that I need your help. My help? Ruby stood up, walking over to the window to watch the rain. I've been thinking, maybe it's time To make some more permanent changes. What kind of changes? Logan asked, joining her by the window. Well, technically I still have my apartment in Boston. She began her words carefully chosen. But over the last few months, this library has become more my home than anywhere else. Logan felt his heart leap. Ruby Collins, are you asking? Me to live here officially? Actually, she turned to face him, a determined glint in her green eyes. I'm suggesting that we turn the library into my permanent office. If you agree, of course. The proposal hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. It wasn't just about a physical space, it was about putting down roots, about committing to something beyond a temporary romantic affair. I think Mrs. Peterson will need to add another chapter to her memoirs. Logan smiled, pulling Ruby close. She's probably already writing it. Ruby laughed softly. That woman has a sixth sense for important moments. The rain continued to fall outside, creating an intimate bubble around them. Among the old bookshelves and the books that had witnessed the beginning of their story, Logan and Ruby were writing a new chapter, not just on its pages, but in their lives. So, Logan murmured against her hair, when do we start moving? Your books. Tomorrow's a good day to start, Ruby replied, snuggling closer into his arms. After all, every great story needs a new beginning. The sound of boxes being stacked echoed through the Stanford Mansion's library as Ruby methodically organized her belongings. The official move to the mansion had begun 2 days ago, transforming the already familiar space into something even more personal. I found this among your things, Claire announced, holding up an old, worn notebook. She had returned from Portland to help with the move, bringing with her a renewed energy to the mansion. Ruby recognized the notebook immediately. It was where she had written her first drafts of Shadows of Twilight in the weeks following her parents' death. I thought I'd lost it. It was kept with my old illustrations, Claire explained, taking a seat in one of the armchairs. I remember you writing on it every night when you thought I was asleep. Logan, who was helping to organize a new shelf for Ruby's books, stopped to observe the sisters' interaction. There was something deeply intimate about the scene, two women reconnecting through shared memories of loss and survival. You should read this, Mrs. Peterson interrupted, gently entering the library with a tray of tea. The Chicago Tribune published a fascinating analysis of R.C. Stone's literary evolution. Ruby took the newspaper the housekeeper offered her, eyes quickly scanning the article. From darkness to light, the journey of R.C. Stone, they've really done their homework. They mention how his early works were marked by themes of loss and isolation, Logan commented, reading over her shoulder, while his new book promises to explore redemption and genuine connections. It's almost as if your life is imitating your art, Claire teased softly, flipping through the old notebook. Or maybe it's the other way around. Ruby felt a lump in her throat at the sight of her younger sister handling those old pages with such care. You illustrated some of those stories, she recalled. Your first drawings. Terrible, Claire laughed, but there was affection in her voice. But you always said they were perfect for the stories. They were, Ruby insisted, moving closer to look at the yellowed sketches. They still are. Logan watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and tenderness. It was rare to see Ruby so open about her past, about the moments that had shaped both her writing and her life. Mr. Stanford. Caroline, her assistant, appeared at the library door. The marketing team from Stanford Publishing is waiting on the line. They want to discuss the launch strategy. Logan hesitated, reluctant to leave that intimate moment. Ruby noticed his hesitation and smiled encouragingly. Go on. Claire and I have a lot of work to do here. The next few hours were filled with the comforting ritual of organization. Ruby and Claire discovered forgotten treasures among the boxes, old letters, photographs, first editions of books that had meant so much to both of them. You really love him, don't you? Claire asked suddenly, as they organized a shelf dedicated to Ruby's first editions. Ruby stopped what she was doing, considering the question. It's unlike anything I've ever written, she finally replied. More real. Mom and Dad would have loved to see that, Claire commented softly. You finally finding your voice, not just on the pages, but in real life. The mention of her parents brought tears to Ruby's eyes. Sometimes I wonder what they would say about all this. About R.C. Stone, about Logan. They'd say that you're finally living, not just surviving, Claire replied, hugging her sister. Glad that it's about time. The familiar sound of footsteps announced Logan's return to the library. He paused for a moment in the doorway, watching the sisters huddled between piles of books and memories. Everything all right in here? He asked softly. Ruby pulled away from Claire's embrace, discreetly wiping her eyes. Yes, just remembering. And planning for the future, Claire added with a meaningful smile. Ruby's just told me about your plans for the office. Logan approached his eyes, roaming over the changes already visible in the library. The old bookshelves now housed a harmonious mix of her classic books and Ruby's contemporary works. It was a perfect metaphor for how their lives were intertwining. Mrs. Peterson is already planning a little celebration when the move is complete. He mentioned picking up one of the photos on the table, a picture of Ruby and Claire as children smiling, despite the difficult circumstances they faced. Just family, Ruby quickly specified. We've had enough exposure for now. Family is more than enough, Logan agreed, carefully putting the photo away. After all, some stories are more special when shared only with those who really matter. The words hung in the air of the library, laden with meaning. Between the pages of books old and new, between memories of the past and promises of the future, a new story was being written, not just in Ruby's manuscripts, but in the hearts of everyone present. The library of the Stanford mansion was silent that afternoon, except for the soft noise of the keyboard as Ruby worked in her new office. 3 months had passed since her official move, and the space had been transformed into a perfect balance between classic and contemporary, just like her relationship with Logan. Miss Stone, Mrs. Peterson interrupted gently, using Ruby's professional name, as she had become accustomed to doing since the truth came out. Literary review is on the line. They want to confirm your participation in next month's panel. Ruby paused in her typing, considering the invitation. The launch of her new book was approaching, and with it a series of public engagements that still made her apprehensive. Tell them I'll confirm by the end of the day, she replied, turning her attention to the computer screen, where the last pages of her novel were awaiting revision. One more thing, Mrs. Peterson added, a peculiar twinkle in her experienced eyes. Mr. Stanford asked me to remind you about dinner tonight. He insisted that it's important. Ruby nodded, puzzled. Logan had been mysteriously busy over the last few days, having secret meetings with Megan and making calls on the quiet. Even Claire, who now visited regularly, seemed to be hiding something. The manuscript on his screen blinked as if asking for attention. The last few weeks had been intense, with final edits and decisions about the cover. Stanford Publishing had decided to do something special for this edition, a collaboration between Claire's original illustrations and her team's contemporary design. Ruby? Megan's voice surprised her from the doorway. We need you in the publisher's meeting room. There are some final decisions about the launch that can't wait. Now? Ruby asked, looking down at her unfinished work. I thought we'd sorted everything out at yesterday's meeting. Trust me, Megan smiled enigmatically. You'll want to see this. Reluctantly, Ruby saved her work and followed Megan to her car. The drive to the Stanford Publishing office was filled with casual conversation about the launch preparations, but Ruby could sense that there was something more going on. When they arrived at the building, instead of going to the usual meeting room, Megan led her into the main auditorium. The lights were low, and for a moment, Ruby thought they had arrived in the wrong place. Megan. What? The lights came on, revealing the auditorium decorated with flowers and panels, displaying pages from her books, including excerpts from Shadows of Twilight and her new novel. In the center of the stage, Logan stood wearing an impeccable suit and smiling in that way that still made your heart race. Welcome to your private preview, he said, holding out his hand to help her onto the stage. Ruby looked around, then noticed the people present: Claire, Mrs. Peterson, some nearby editors, and even Catherine Martinez from the Chicago Tribune, all smiling expectantly. Logan, what's all this? You've spent years writing about important moments in people's lives, he began, his voice carrying that unique blend of confidence and vulnerability she had learned to love. About how sometimes you have to lose something to find something even more precious. Ruby felt her hands tremble slightly as Logan knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "A few months ago, I made a promise never to get involved with a female employee." He continued, a smile playing on his lips. "It was the best promise I ever broke, because it led me to you. Now I want to make a new promise, one I intend to keep for the rest of my life." Tears began to form in Ruby's eyes as Logan opened the box, revealing a sapphire and diamond ring. "Ruby Collins R.C. Stone, or simply the woman who changed my story, would you do me the honor of writing the next chapter of our lives together?" The silence in the auditorium was palpable, filled only by the soft sound of Claire sniffling emotionally somewhere in the front row. "Yes," Ruby replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I want to write every possible story with you." When Logan slid the ring onto her finger, applause filled the room. Mrs. Peterson was visibly moved, probably already planning how she would include this moment in her memories. "So," Logan smiled, hugging his now fiancée, "do you think we can top the romance in your last book?" Ruby laughed through her tears. "I think this is a story that even I couldn't have imagined writing." The celebration that followed was intimate and meaningful, just as they wanted. Catherine Martinez, with her characteristic discretion, promised to keep the engagement a secret until after the book launch. "After all," she smiled, "some stories deserve to be told at the right time." Later, back in the mansion's library, Ruby looked at the ring on her finger, still processing the day's events. Logan watched her from his favorite armchair, the very one where it had all begun during that stormy night. "So," he asked softly, "ready to start our own chapter?" Ruby smiled, thinking of all the stories she had written and how none of them compared to the reality of her own love story. "With you always." The event hall of the Chicago Arts Institute glowed under the soft lights as elegantly dressed guests circulated with glasses of champagne in their hands. It was the launch night for Ruby Collins's new book, or R.C. Stone, as some of her older readers still prefer to call her. "Are you nervous?" Logan asked gently, adjusting a lock of Ruby's red hair that had escaped from its elaborate bun. "Strangely, no," she replied, her fingers playing with her engagement ring. "It's different from all the other launches. For once, I'm not hiding." The event had been carefully planned by Stanford Publishing to mark not only the launch of the book, but also the official unveiling of the engagement. The press were present, but in a controlled way, with Catherine Martinez from the Chicago Tribune having exclusive access for the main coverage. Claire walked across the hall towards them, radiant in a blue dress that matched her freshly dyed hair in a softer shade. "The illustrations are making a splash," she announced, referring to the exhibition accompanying the launch, a gallery of her original artwork for the book. How could they not? Megan joined the conversation, elegant in her silver suit. "The combination of the illustrations with the story is perfect. Pre-sales have already exceeded all expectations." Mrs. Peterson, who had insisted on personally supervising some aspects of the event, approached with a satisfied expression. "The line for autographs is already forming, Miss Stone, and they've brought not only the new book, but also old copies of Shadows of Twilight." Ruby took a deep breath, preparing herself for the moment she had avoided so much in her career, direct contact with her readers. Logan squeezed her hand gently in silent support. "Remember," he whispered, "you are no longer alone in this story." The book signing turned out to be a surprisingly moving experience. Readers shared stories of how Ruby's books had helped them through difficult times, especially Shadows of Twilight, with its reflections on loss and starting over. "Your book helped me get over grieving for my father," one young reader confessed, tears in her eyes. "Knowing that R.C. Stone also went through this pain makes everything seem more real, more honest." Ruby felt her own heart squeeze at the confession. "Sometimes," she replied softly, "we need to share our most painful stories to help others heal theirs." The evening progressed, and between book signings and conversations, Ruby occasionally caught glimpses of her new life. Logan chatting animatedly with international editors, Claire explaining her illustration techniques to a fascinated group of artists, Megan discreetly coordinating the events team. "I think it's time," Logan announced, climbing onto the small stage set up in the center of the hall. The buzz of the crowd gradually died down. Just over 6 months ago, he began, his voice clear and confident. I made a promise to myself that I would never get involved with a female employee again. Then fate, with its peculiar sense of humor, sent R.C. Stone to work as my housekeeper. Soft laughter echoed through the hall, and Ruby felt her cheeks blush slightly. What began as research for a book, Logan continued, has turned into the most extraordinary love story I've ever experienced. And now I'm delighted to announce not only the release of Masks of the Heart, but also my engagement to its brilliant author. Applause filled the room as Ruby took to the stage to join Logan. Under the soft lights, the sapphire ring on her finger sparkled like a promise kept. Some of you may be wondering if our story is in the book, Ruby said, her voice firmer than she had ever thought possible in public. The truth is it is and it isn't, because some stories are too big to just fit on the pages. Later, as the event began to disperse, Ruby found a quiet moment in the small VIP room. The copy of her new book rested in her hands, the cover a work of art that mixed Claire's illustrations with classic elements of the Stanford mansion. Thinking of writing a sequel, Logan joked, entering the room and offering her a glass of champagne. Actually, Ruby smiled, accepting the drink, I was thinking about how life sometimes writes better stories than any author could imagine. And that story is just beginning, he replied, taking a seat next to her. Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, her face alight with maternal satisfaction. The last guests are leaving, and the morning papers already have their headlines ready about the event. Let me guess, Logan laughed. They've already included a chapter about tonight in their memoirs. Naturally, the housekeeper smiled with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. After all, it's not every day that a love story begins with a storm in the library and ends with a book launch at the Chicago Arts Institute. Ruby looked at the people who had become her family, Logan, her fiancé, and first reader Claire, her sister and artist Megan, her future sister-in-law and confidant Mrs. Peterson, the accomplice who had helped start it all. The end is only the beginning, she murmured, words she had written so many times in her books and which now took on a whole new meaning. And what a wonderful story it will be, Logan replied, leaning down to kiss her softly. Outside, the lights of Chicago shone against the night sky, promising new chapters, new adventures, new stories to be lived and told. And this time, Ruby was ready to live them fully without masks or pseudonyms, only with the truth of her heart and the love she had found between the pages of her own story.